Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're mapping out the absolutely fascinating journey of Gazi Rakayet. He's a highly successful engineer who went from complete, unapologetic atheism to deep spiritual belief. And we're going to look at the exact scientific and mathematical touchpoints that literally completely rewired his view of the universe. So it brings up a really compelling question. Can actively trying to disprove an ancient religious text using hard science actually lead you straight into faith? For our narrator, the initial goal definitely wasn't to find peace or spirituality. Not at all. It was to use cold logic and modern physics to tear down religious claims. But as you'll see, that highly analytical approach led him to some incredibly unexpected conclusions. I am going to experience the agony of death. Why did you create me if I have to die? Wow. Just a raw, powerful sentiment. This perfectly captures the intense existential dread and anger he felt following the tragic death of his young nephew from a brain tumor. It's a crisis many of us can relate to, right? Seeing a child pass away triggered a severe internal rebellion for him. He just couldn't reconcile the agony of death with the idea of a merciful creator, so mortality itself became this source of deep, deep resentment. If we look at how this played out chronologically, you can see how this grief completely shattered his worldview. He abandoned his religious upbringing, stopped praying entirely, and instead just immersed himself in the works of theoretical physicists like Einstein and Stephen Hawking. By the time he hit his 30s, he had embraced absolute atheism. In fact, it wasn't until he was 38 years old that a debate with some friends prompted him to actually open up the Quran. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive psychological leap he eventually made. Think about it. For years, his life was overshadowed by nihilism. Human existence felt like a cruel, chaotic, temporary joke. But ultimately, he arrived at a place where he viewed the universe, including the heavy stuff like life and death, as a highly structured, mathematically balanced system. So how in the world did he bridge that incredible gap? Well, honestly, it started with a bit of intellectual arrogance. Around age 38, he goes to a library, buys a Bengali translation of the Quran, and his goal was hyper-specific. He was combative. He wanted to read it purely to find scientific inaccuracies, point them out, and definitively prove the text wrong using his rigorous background as an engineer. But, spoiler alert, instead of finding those immediate errors, he was instantly stunned by the philosophy. He encounters this verse from Surah Maida, chapter 5, verse 32. Whoever saves one life, it is as if he had saved mankind entirely. Now, for a man who had been utterly consumed by the tragedy of a single death, his nephew's, finding such a profound humanistic elevation of just one human life, it completely shook his preconceptions. It forced him to keep reading. Now, what's really interesting is how his background in physics forced him to confront some very specific scientific verses, starting right at the origins of the universe. Like any science buff, he was deeply familiar with the Big Bang Theory, right? That cosmological model stating our universe rapidly expanded from a single high-density, high-temperature point. Keeping that Big Bang model in his head, he hits Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 30. It literally describes the heavens and the earth as a joint entity that was then separated. To his highly analytical mind, recognizing a striking parallel between this 1400-year-old verse and the modern cosmological model of the universe's origin, it absolutely stunned him. But his exploration didn't stop at the literal beginning of time. It extended to the very end of it. Back in his atheist years, he used to devour astrophysics books detailing cosmic entropy, the gradual decline of the universe into disorder, and specifically, the Big Crunch. That's the hypothetical scenario where the universe's expansion eventually reverses and everything collapses back into a dense singularity. So the crucial point here is how the text aligned with that exact theory. He reads verse 104 in that same chapter, which says, "The day we will fold the heaven like the folding of a written sheet for the records." Seeing the universe's ultimate end, described as a rolling scroll, perfectly mirrored the scientific model of the Big Crunch for him. It's like the universe expanding and then just rolling right back up into itself. And it wasn't just theoretical cosmology either. He found himself reevaluating everyday astronomy. Previously, he had argued with colleagues that the sun was totally stationary while the Earth orbited around it. But he later discovered through scientific literature that modern equipment like the Hubble telescope proved the sun actually does move in its own orbit within the Milky Way. So when he goes back to the text and finds verses explicitly stating that the sun, moon, and celestial bodies all travel within their own respective orbits, the alignment between recent telescopic discoveries and this ancient text just kept adding up in his mind. The mathematics of creation. Finding calculated precision in ancient texts. Beyond astrophysics, remember, His engineering brain naturally thought in numbers. So take the number 26. In chemistry, 26 is the atomic number of iron. It represents the exact number of protons in an iron atom's nucleus. It is a fundamental, unchangeable scientific constant. Now here is where the math gets genuinely surprising. The chapter in the Quran titled Al-Hadid, which literally translates to the iron, happens to be chapter 57. The atomic weight of iron, if you take the average of its stable, permanent isotopes, is exactly 57. Furthermore, using a historical Arabic alphanumeric system, the root word for iron holds a value of 26. For an engineer who is totally used to calculating statistical probabilities, having these intersecting numerical layers about a specific chemical element was absolutely mind-bending. Then, he stumbled onto an even more universal number, 1.618. You probably know this as the golden ratio. It is a mathematical constant found everywhere in the natural world. I mean, everywhere. From the spirals of galaxies to the proportions of the human body, and it's heavily used in architecture and engineering to achieve perfect balance. According to his deep dive into the structure of the text, if you map out all 114 chapters and their corresponding verse counts, separate the numbers that repeat from the ones that don't, and divide their sums, the result is exactly 1.618. For an engineer, finding the golden ratio woven into the very structural organization of the chapters and verses, that was the ultimate proof. He could no longer brush it off as a coincidence. To him, it was an undeniable signature of deliberate design. The 99 versus 100, reconciling logic with spiritual peace. This whole intense intellectual journey eventually culminated in this really unique philosophical framework. He realized that just chasing empirical data wasn't actually bringing him peace. So he conceptualized it like this. Human intellect, science, our absolute greatest engineering efforts, they can only ever get us to 99. We can understand the atoms, we can map the orbits, but there is an inherent limit to human capacity. That final missing one is divine purpose. Without it, we can never reach 100% completion. As he beautifully puts it, this one is God. This one gives me 100. 100 means peace. By finally accepting that missing one, he was able to let go of the immense anger he had been carrying for decades. The existential dread that plagued him since his young nephew's death was finally, truly replaced by total spiritual peace. Understanding the hardcore science and the intricate math actually allowed him to surrender that intellectual arrogance. It gave him a framework where his personal tragedy wasn't just some cruel, random, meaningless event, but actually part of a profoundly purposeful, mathematically balanced creation. It's a really powerful reminder of how finding order in the grand universe can actually help us process our own intimate grief. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a deeply provocative thought. We so often pit science and faith against one another, right? Like it has to be a battle. But this journey asks us, does acknowledging the absolute limits of human knowledge actually open the door to true understanding? Perhaps the most profound discoveries happen right there, right exactly where our scientific certainty ends. Thanks so much for joining me on this exploration.